Why is southern Italy so much poorer than northern Italy, and why it will remain that way? The poverty that exists in southern Italy is in stark contrast to the wealth on display in the north. Most tourists never make it farther south than Rome. If they did, they would be surprised at how rural and impoverished southern Italy is. The persistent economic disparity between southern and northern Italy is due to a number of factors that we will explore. I believe this stark disparity in wealth will continue for the foreseeable future. It's worth noting that Italy is a relatively wealthy country and the poverty of the south is relative when all things are considered. Sicily, Italy's poorest province, has a similar Human Development Index score to Slovakia, Hungary, and Puerto Rico. Geographical factors. Let's consider the topography of Italy. To the north of Italy, you have the Alps, the highest and most extensive mountain range in Europe. Most of Italy's water comes from the Alps. From the Western Alps flows the Po River to the Adriatic Sea. The Po River has one of the longest contiguous flows surrounded by flat, fertile land in Europe. 17 million people, or about a third of the total population of Italy, live in this area. The rich, fertile farmland of the Po Valley contributed to the north being wealthier. Richer areas of Italy overlap with the Po River. Perhaps just important as fertile land is the transport options afforded by a large river. The Po River gave the valley access to both Genoa and Venice, which were major port cities since the Middle Ages, facilitating trade with the East. It can't be overstated the impact naval trade had on northern Italy, as it was a significant driver of economic activity in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Venice and Genoa exerted considerable control over Mediterranean trade. They possessed exclusive rights to trade with Constantinople and the Black Sea. They were employed by crusading armies to ferry troops to the Middle East. Historically, the Kingdom of Naples dominated the south in contrast to the north, which was organized into various mercantile city-states that competed against one another. The cities of Rome, Florence, Milan, and Genoa are all in the north. The south only has Naples. Typically, Italians divide their country into north, central, and south, in which case Rome and Florence may be considered central Italy. However, for our purposes, we'll divide the country into north and south. The south does have some fertile areas, but more importantly, it has several good ports which are conducive to trade. The cities of Naples, Palermo, Catania, and Bari all have a combination of good ports and fertile land, which would lend itself to be a fairly well-off and populated region or city. Due to the heat and oppressiveness of the midday sun, southern Italy, as well as most areas with a similar climate and geography, they tend to take off during the time the sun is hottest, returning to work in the evening. In contrast, northern European work cultures tend to work a continuous period from morning to early evening. Historical context. Italy was unified under the Roman Republic in the 3rd century BC and remained relatively whole even after the fall of the Roman Empire under the Ostrogoths until it became a matter of dispute between the Kingdom of the Lombards and the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire. Italy was a divided nation from Justinian in the 500s to Napoleon in 1798. The north largely existed as small independent city-states, while the south was ruled as a territory of a distant emperor. The first Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne conquered northern Italy as far south as about Rome, but his southern campaign failed to make lasting gains. The Holy Roman Empire continued to rule northern Italy for hundreds of years, while not making any permanent or lasting gains in the south, which was held by the Byzantine Empire and occasionally Islamic forces. Southern Italy was subject to destruction and devastation repeatedly as warring armies and empires and nations fought over it. Historically, the cities of Genoa, Venice, and Florence were economic powerhouses during the late medieval and the Renaissance period. Wealth accumulated and spread across the regions closest to these cities. When the Industrial Revolution arrived in Italy, investment in workshops and factories occurred primarily where that wealth was concentrated, which was northern Italy around these cities. It's worth mentioning that the lack of a unified Italy was a factor in preventing the spread of wealth and investment into the south. However, I would argue that even if Italy was unified before the Industrial Revolution, the wealth and investment still would have heavily concentrated in the north around those cities we discussed, and this great north-south disparity would have persisted. Eventually, northern Italy was overshadowed by Spain, the Netherlands, Britain, due to their grip on global trade and their naval power and their navies. Italy lagged the rest of the developed world, and it was in a state of turbulence and upheaval until its reunification in 1871. It's also worth mentioning that the importance of finance in modern civilization, even like during the Renaissance period, it can't be understated. Reunification. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that Italian reunification caused widespread destruction of southern Italy in contrast to the north, which was largely left intact. Italian reunification was conducted primarily by the northern state of Sardinia, Piedmont, with its capital in Turin. This kingdom was composed of what is now southeastern France. It was more aligned with northern Europe than the Mediterranean. The money and investment would naturally flow around the capital. Southern Italy was not keen on reunification, especially by another state. They desired to be in control of the process if it was going to occur at all. Arguably, the South was punished in a way by receiving little investment. It's worth considering the economic disparities between what was formerly Eastern Germany versus Western Germany. Germany arguably handled the merging of the country better than Italy, and yet dramatic disparities still persist between Eastern and Western Germany. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain and flowed out of London to align nations in areas that had close cultural and economic ties. Northern Italy is a relatively industrialized area. In fact, industry was perhaps the only path to some level of prosperity, given Italy's lack of natural resources and fertile land, with the exception of the Po River Valley. In contrast to the North's industrial orientation, the South has primarily been agricultural. Silk production was an important economic driver in northern Italy in the early 20th century as well. Arguably, a country's greatest resource is its people. The drain of human capital out of southern Italy to Europe and the Americas significantly hindered development of southern Italy. Southern Italians have immigrated to both northern Italy and the rest of the world for hundreds of years in search of opportunities and a better life. Perhaps this is why southern Italian cuisine is so globally widespread. Consider the prevalence of tomatoes in Italian-American cooking. Discrimination. Southern Italians face discrimination in the United States, partly due to their darker skin tones and adherence to Catholicism. Northern European Protestants were more quickly assimilated into the United States. Many of the Italian immigrants to America were from southern Italy. When American soldiers arrived in Italy during World War II, many of the men were second-generation Italians, and they were better educated and more successful than the northern Italians they liberated. There is a vicious cycle whereby underperformance in southern Italy leads to a lack of investments, which further fuels more underperformance. Northern Italians are known to have several derogatory terms for southern Italians, considering them uneducated and rural people. The Mafia is not the root cause of poverty in southern Italy, but it is rather a symptom of wider socioeconomic factors. However, it can be argued that the Mafia contributes to continued underinvestment and impoverishment in southern Italy. Some people would claim that the Mafia is a substitute for a government in places where the legitimate government has failed. The persistent economic disparity between southern and northern Italy is a complex issue shaped by geographical, historical, and social factors. While the South possesses some fertile land and some decent ports, and a lack of investment in historical circumstances have limited its economic development, discrimination, emigration, the presence of the Mafia further perpetuate this divide. To address these disparities, concentrated efforts are required to promote economic opportunities, invest in infrastructure, and foster social integration between the regions. Only through such comprehensive measures can Italy hope to bridge the economic gap and unlock the true potential of the nation as a whole.